James Whittaker built a logistics empire in Chicago, but no amount of wealth ever filled the void left by the son he lost a decade ago. At 54, James leads a life of cold routine and quiet grief. But one day, waiting on a train platform, he hears something that stops him cold. Two twin boys singing an old lullaby. One only his son used to know. When he turns and sees their faces, those unmistakable eyes, his heart skips. Who are they? And why do they look so much like his late child? What begins as a chance encounter spirals into a rediscovery of lost love, buried guilt, and a second chance at family. The mother of the boys? A woman his family once drove away, now sick, fading, and alone. As James steps into their lives, he's forced to confront a past he long buried, and decide if he has the courage to fight for a future that still has meaning. Could these boys be his redemption, or is it too late to mend what was broken? Stick around. This is a story about legacy, love, and the cost of silence. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Chicago winters had a way of pressing into your ribs. Even beneath a double-breasted wool coat, the chill found its way into the spaces people forgot to protect. James Whittaker, CEO of Whittaker Logistics, stood alone on the Metra platform as snow whispered onto his shoulders and settled into the folds of his solitude. At 54, James had everything money could preserve: power, prestige, and privacy, but none of it stopped the December wind from reminding him what he no longer had. 10 years. 10 years since the crash. 10 years since his son Andrew, his only child, was lost in a blink of metal and fire on an icy interstate. 10 years of living in a high-rise penthouse that echoed with silence and grief. 10 years of avoiding train stations like this one, because Andrew had loved trains. But this morning, something had pulled him here. Maybe it was the dreams, the ones where Andrew stood just out of reach, laughing, building train tracks in the living room like he used to. Maybe it was guilt, sharpened over time. Or maybe, just maybe, it was fate. The announcement crackled over the speakers, but James barely heard it. His eyes had drifted to the far bench, where two small boys sat side by side, swinging their feet in perfect sync. One had a knitted blue scarf with fraying ends, the other wore a red beanie too large for his head. They couldn't have been older than 6 or 7. But it wasn't their clothes or their faces that stole James's breath, it was their voices. Softly, in unison, they were singing. In the moonlight, close your eyes, Daddy's near, no need to cry. James staggered back a step. That lullaby, that melody, it had no name, no author. It was something he and Andrew had made up together on long nights when grief tried to visit even then. James had never sung it since, never heard it since, but these two boys, they knew it. And then he saw them clearly, the curve of their brows, the lift of their chins, and their eyes, those unmistakable gray-blue eyes that seemed carved from storm clouds and sorrow. His breath hitched. They looked exactly like Andrew. James approached slowly, as if any sudden movement would scare them off. The boys paused mid-verse and stared at him. Their gaze didn't falter, didn't shy. It studied him back. One of them, the one in the blue scarf, tilted his head. "Sir?" he asked, voice clear and careful. "Are you okay?" James nodded, but his throat felt tight. "That song. Where did you learn it?" The boys glanced at each other. "Our mommy sings it," said the boy in red. "She said our daddy taught it to her. He sang it to her belly, before we were born." James dropped to the bench beside them, disbelief and wonder warring in his chest. "What's your name?" "I'm Liam," said the boy in blue. "I'm Logan," said the other. He looked between them, blinking against the memories flooding his vision. "And your mom?" "Lucy," Liam replied proudly. "She says she used to love someone who looked like us." James's world tilted on its axis. Lucy, his son's college sweetheart. The girl who showed up at his doorstep once, clutching Andrew's hand, her eyes full of dreams too humble for the Whitaker family legacy. He remembered the fight, the door slam, the silence that followed. Before James could ask another question, the boys' attention snapped to the stairwell. "Mom!" they cried in unison, jumping up. James turned, and there she was. Lucy, paler, thinner, but still unmistakably her. She froze when she saw him, clutching the stair rail like it might hold her up. "Mr. Whitaker?" she asked, breathlessly. James stood, voice caught in his throat. "Lucy, are they?" Her eyes filled instantly, and she nodded. "They're Andrew's," she whispered. James stared at her, then at the boys who now stood protectively at her sides. And in that moment, in the icy shadows of a forgotten train station, the coldest day of the year cracked open something warm. It was grief. It was love. It was a second chance dressed as two little boys with eyes like thunder and a lullaby only one man could have taught. He took a breath, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know." Lucy held his gaze. "Now, you do." The frigid wind that had cut through James earlier now felt like a dull hum in the background, muted by the pounding of his heart. Lucy stood just feet away, her chest rising and falling with visible effort, as if each breath came at a cost. The boys, Liam and Logan, clung to her coat with a practiced familiarity that spoke volumes. James swallowed, unsure what to say next. He had prepared himself for many things in life, corporate wars, grief's long reach, but not for this moment. "I didn't know," he repeated, softer this time, as if saying it again would somehow make it believable. Lucy nodded faintly. "You weren't supposed to. That was the agreement, remember?" Her voice, though strained, still carried the calm fire he remembered from a decade ago. It wasn't accusatory, it was resigned. James took a cautious step forward. "What agreement?" She blinked slowly, as if those words hurt more than she'd anticipated. "The one your sister made, after Andrew died. She said your family would take care of everything, except me. Said I was never to contact you. Said it was what Andrew would have wanted." James felt as if the wind had knocked the air from his lungs. "Eleanor told you that?" Lucy looked away. "She made it very clear. No support, no inheritance, no mention. She even offered money for silence. I refused. I had already lost Andrew. I wasn't going to lose my dignity, too." Liam and Logan stared up at James, wide-eyed and silent. He knelt to their level, his voice trembling. "I didn't know. Lucy, I swear to you, if I had—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "I believe you." The weight of those words, their mercy, landed on him like a blessing and a curse all at once. "Where are you living?" he asked. Are you okay?" Lucy gave a tired smile, though her eyes shimmered with exhaustion. "We manage. We rent a small unit near West Garfield Park. Not ideal, but it's what we can afford. I teach piano part-time, and I've been sick." James stiffened. "Sick?" "Pulmonary fibrosis. Diagnosed last year. It's stable, but, well, you know how that goes. Some days are harder than others." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. He looked down at the boys. "They need you. You need help." Lucy nodded, but said nothing. She didn't need to. The unspoken truth was already laid bare. "Come with me," James said, rising. "Let me take you all to lunch, or somewhere warm. I just want to talk. I want to understand." Lucy hesitated. Liam looked at her, then at James. "Can we go, Mommy? He knows our song." That simple, innocent plea broke the last bit of distance. Lucy's eyes welled with tears she couldn't blink away. "Okay," she whispered, "but just for a little while." The warmth of the cafe downtown was a sharp contrast to the cold of the platform. James sat across from them in a private corner booth, watching as Logan stirred his hot chocolate, cheeks pink from the sudden comfort of heat. Liam asked 100 questions about trains, the city, snow, and even why spoons are curved. James answered every one with quiet patience. Lucy sat beside them, a little straighter now, though her cough flared every so often, short, dry, troubling. She caught James's concerned glance and waved it off. "It's been worse." "You shouldn't have to say that," James replied gently. She looked at him. "Well, we don't always get the life we planned." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Maybe not, but we can still make it right." She paused, her expression softening. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come back after all this time?" James looked at the boys, then at her. "Because they're here. Because Andrew left something beautiful behind. And I almost lost it again." For a long moment, they sat in silence. Then Lucy reached into her worn handbag and pulled out a folded envelope. "He wrote this the night before he died. I didn't have the heart to send it." She slid it across the table. James hesitated, then opened it with reverence. The handwriting was unmistakably Andrew's. Inside were lines full of longing, forgiveness, and an unmistakable hope that his father would one day understand the life he chose. James read it quietly, and when he finished, he looked up with eyes shining through tears he didn't bother to hide. "I want to be part of their lives," he said, "if you'll let me." Lucy smiled tiredly. "They've already made room for you." The next weekend, James found himself standing nervously outside a modest brick apartment building in West Garfield Park. The taxi ride over had been quiet, except for the sound of the city passing him by. He clutched a paper bag filled with model train pieces, some from his childhood, others he'd purchased new from a boutique hobby shop the day before. Lucy had texted him earlier that morning. "The boys are asking about you. We're home all day if you want to come by." He had stared at the message for several minutes before answering. "I'd love to." Now, facing the worn steps that led to their unit, James felt more uncertain than he had in years. Negotiating mergers, leading thousands of employees, and navigating billion-dollar decisions, none of it prepared him for this moment. He knocked gently. The door opened, and Logan immediately threw himself at James's leg with a giddy smile. "You came!" "Of course I did," James replied, surprised by the boy's immediate affection. He gently ruffled his hair. Inside, Liam was assembling a puzzle on the carpet while Lucy sat curled up on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her frail shoulders. Her face lit up when she saw James. "Come in, we made space." James stepped in, taking off his coat. The place was small, one bedroom, cramped kitchen, and a tiny living room, but it was clean and filled with warmth. Drawings covered the refrigerator. A faded photo of Andrew in his 20s sat next to a candle on a small shelf. James's chest tightened. "I brought something," he said, kneeling beside Liam and opening the bag. "Do you guys know what this is?" Liam's eyes widened as James pulled out a miniature train engine, polished and gleaming. "Is that a real model?" James smiled. "It sure is. And I brought tracks, too. We can build a little world, if you're up for it." For the next hour, the room buzzed with the boys' laughter and excited chatter as James helped them snap together tracks, set up little stations, and connect cars. Logan named the engine Captain Silver and insisted it had magical powers. Liam, ever meticulous, organized the cargo pieces by color and purpose. Lucy watched them from the couch, her expression a mixture of wonder and sadness. Her children, who had known so much instability, now looked at James as if he were a lighthouse cutting through fog. During a lull, Lucy spoke quietly. "Andrew used to talk about trains with your father. He always wanted to share that part of his childhood with his kids." James nodded, his voice thick. "He would have made a wonderful dad." "You're helping him do that, in a way," she said gently, "by being here." The words struck a place deep in James he hadn't visited in years. For the first time in a decade, he didn't feel like a man defined by grief, but one reaching for redemption. As the day faded into evening, James offered to cook. The kitchen barely fit one person, but he made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, laughing when Logan tried to sneak cheese slices from the counter. After dinner, the boys changed into pajamas, and Lucy pulled James aside. "I'm not sure how long I can keep doing this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "The coughing's getting worse. Some nights I don't know if I'll wake up." James took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Then let me help, please." She looked at him, eyes searching. "Why, James? Why are you really doing this?" He didn't hesitate. "Because I pushed Andrew away. Because I let pride and silence steal my son's final years. I can't bring him back. But I can love the people he loved. I need to." Lucy closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." Before he left that night, the boys hugged him tightly. Liam whispered, "Will you come back next weekend?" James crouched down, holding their small hands in his. "I'll come back every weekend. And more, if you'll have me." As he stepped into the cool night air, James realized something had shifted. His world, once so sterile and predictable, now held flickers of color and warmth. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in years, he had a reason to keep showing up. And that was enough, for now. The following weeks became a quiet rhythm in James's life. Visits to the apartment, walks to the park with Logan and Liam, afternoons building model trains and reading bedtime stories from books once stored in his son's childhood room. The boys began calling him Grandpa James, first tentatively, then with unguarded affection. Each time he heard it, it shook something loose in him. But joy, he knew, often walked beside grief. Lucy's condition had worsened. One Saturday morning, James arrived to find Liam attempting to make oatmeal while Logan sat quietly at the table, coloring a crooked picture of their apartment with gray crayon. The room was too still, too heavy. "She's still coughing," Liam whispered, eyes wide. "She didn't want to get up." James rushed to the bedroom, finding Lucy pale and trembling beneath thin blankets. Her breathing was shallow, labored. He knelt beside the bed, gently placing his hand over hers. "You need to see a doctor, now." She shook her head weakly. "I can't afford another hospital stay. And what if they take the boys?" "They won't," James said firmly, already pulling out his phone. "Not while I'm here." He arranged a private ambulance through his company's health plan. Within the hour, Lucy was admitted to a pulmonary care unit at a hospital, far better than any she had known. James used every contact, every favor owed, to ensure she received the best. That night, sitting in the hospital hallway outside Lucy's room, James stared at the ceiling, shoulders slumped. "I should have helped 10 years ago," he murmured aloud. "She never blamed you," said a quiet voice. James turned. It was a nurse, mid-40s, kind eyes, clipboard in hand. "She talked about you," the woman continued. "Said you were the only one who looked at her like she mattered when she was younger. Said her son, your son, had your stubborn heart." James swallowed hard. "I was proud of that heart once." The nurse smiled gently. "He'd be proud of you now." The boys stayed with James that weekend, curled up on his living room couch like they belonged there. He made pancakes in the morning and taught them how to use the espresso machine with hot chocolate. They spent the afternoon building a miniature train bridge across the dining table, and James caught himself laughing. Loudly, genuinely, for the first time in years. That night, after the boys had fallen asleep, he sat on the edge of the bed in his guest room, watching them breathe. The ache of regret swelled again, but this time it was tempered by something new: purpose. He picked up his phone and texted his sister. "We need to talk. Soon." Eleanor responded immediately. "What is this about, James? You've been different, and not in a good way. It's important. It's family. Come over tomorrow." When Eleanor arrived the next day, impeccably dressed and tightly wound as ever, she walked in like she owned the penthouse. James met her at the door, stern but calm. "I want you to meet someone," he said, guiding her toward the living room. Two heads peeked up from the couch cautiously. Logan waved. "These are Andrew's sons," James said. Eleanor froze. "That's impossible." "It's not. Lucy told me the truth, and if you had listened back then, really listened, we might have known them sooner." "You think I wanted this?" she snapped. "You think I was trying to hurt Andrew?" "I think you let fear decide for all of us," James replied, "but I won't let it keep hurting them." She stared at the boys, stunned by how closely they resembled her late nephew. Slowly, her shoulders sank. "They look just like him," James nodded, "especially the eyes." Eleanor approached cautiously, kneeling before Logan and Liam. Do you like trains?" she asked stiffly. Liam nodded. "Grandpa James is teaching us. He said our dad loved them too." Something broke in her expression. Guilt, perhaps, or grief long buried. "I'll help," she said quietly, "whatever they need." That evening, as James tucked the boys into bed, Liam asked softly, "Grandpa?" "Yes, kiddo?" "Do you think our dad can see us?" James paused, eyes stinging. "I think he sees everything, and I think he's proud of you." Logan reached out, hugging James's arm tightly. "And you?" James's voice caught in his throat. I hope he's proud of me too." Outside the window, Chicago's skyline shimmered in the distance, but James's world was now centered in that small room, filled with warmth, healing, and second chances. The drive to the hospital was silent, save for the muffled hum of a city traffic outside the luxury sedan. Stephen gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, the little girl beside him clutching a small canvas bag filled with handmade bracelets and a single worn photograph. Chloe didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence, steady and composed, spoke volumes more than her words ever could. When they arrived, the contrast between Stephen's world and hers was painfully stark. The hospital's exterior was faded, its windows clouded with age. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and something more deeply human: exhaustion, worry, grief. Chloe led the way, her small feet padding down corridors with practiced familiarity. She didn't hesitate. She didn't falter. "He's in room 4B, she said softly, pushing open the door with both hands. The sight inside stole Stephen's breath. A boy, thin, pale, far too still for a child of 13, lay surrounded by humming machines and soft beeping monitors. Tubes ran into his arms, a heart monitor blinked in uneven rhythm. The sharp scent of hospital-grade detergent clung to every surface. Chloe stepped inside with reverent quiet, tiptoeing to her brother's bedside. "This is my brother Ryan," she whispered. "He's been sleeping for 2 days now, but I talked to him anyway." Stephen stood at the threshold, something cold and jagged twisting in his chest. Ryan's face was fragile but familiar, same shape of the jaw, same dark lashes Chloe had. And something else, too, that haunted resilience. The kind Stephen recognized in people who'd grown up knowing life's weight too soon. Chloe turned to him, placing her canvas bag on the metal table beside the bed. "I told him about you," she said, her voice so soft it trembled. "He'd be happy to know someone cared." Stephen stepped forward, slowly, reverently. He placed the note Chloe had brought him, the one scribbled in crayon with tiny handwriting and bigger hopes, down next to the heart monitor. The crinkle of paper was deafening in the quiet room. "I want to help," he said at last, his voice low, but filled with unmistakable resolve. "Not just with the bills, with everything." Chloe's head tilted. Her eyes searched his with an intensity that startled him. "You promise?" "I promise," he said firmly. "We'll get him the best care. He won't have to be here much longer." He didn't tell her that the hospital she'd brought him to was barely holding on, underfunded and understaffed. But he would change that, too. He made a mental note to contact his personal physician, to pull every string he had in the medical world, to bring Ryan to a better facility where miracles were more than rare accidents. The next morning, Stephen returned. Not alone this time. With him came a private ambulance, a specialist cardiologist, and a full care team. Chloe stood by with wide, unsure eyes as they carefully transferred her brother to the gurney. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked as they wheeled Ryan out. Stephen knelt beside her, gently brushing her hair behind her ear. "We're going to do everything possible. I found a heart center that can help him, Chloe. The best one in the state." She bit her lip. "You're really helping us, not just saying it." "I am," he said simply, "because I believe in you and your brother." Chloe nodded solemnly, then reached into her bag and pulled out a pendant, a small silver locket, worn with time, a delicate floral etching faded from years of handling. She placed it in Stephen's palm. "It's our lucky charm," she said. "Mom gave it to us before she passed. She said it used to belong to someone she loved very much, but she never told me who." Stephen's fingers closed around the pendant and froze. The shape, the detail, it was unmistakable. His breath caught in his throat. He had given that exact pendant, one of a kind, to his fiancée, Margaret, years ago, before the storm, before the disappearance, before the grief swallowed him whole. Stephen looked up, heart pounding. "Where did she get this?" Chloe shrugged gently. "She never said, just that it was special. She used to hold it when she was sad. I hold it now." His mind swirled with questions, with images of Margaret's smile, her voice, the way she vanished without explanation. Could it be? Was this more than coincidence? But he said nothing. Not yet. "Let's get your brother better," he said instead, his voice thick. As the ambulance pulled away, Stephen stood beside Chloe on the curb, his hand still wrapped around the pendant. This wasn't just about charity. Not anymore. This was something deeply personal. Something fate had brought full circle. Something that felt like redemption. The private suite at Fairmont Children's Heart Institute was a world apart from the public hospital where Stephen had first met Ryan. Warm lighting replaced fluorescent glare. Walls bore cheerful murals instead of peeling paint. And, most importantly, hope hung tangibly in the air. It was quiet, yes, but a different kind of quiet. One that hummed with possibility rather than resignation. Stephen sat in a cushioned chair beside Ryan's bed, watching the boy's chest rise and fall with steady rhythm. Machines beeped softly, reading vitals that, for the first time in days, seemed promising. Chloe sat across the room on a beanbag chair, legs crossed, her fingers weaving thread into another bracelet. Green and silver this time. "He always liked green," she said, not looking up. Said it made him think of grass and soccer and running. Stephen smiled faintly. "Then green it is." Chloe reached into her bag and pulled out a bundle of yarn. "You want to learn?" He chuckled. "You think I can?" She finally looked up, her eyes half challenging, half hopeful. "You run a whole company, don't you? You can learn this." Stephen scooted closer and held out his hands. The next half-hour passed slowly and meaningfully. Chloe instructed with a mixture of patience and humor, guiding his clumsy hands through the braiding process. They laughed as he tangled the threads and groaned dramatically when one slipped from his grip. "You're not terrible," she announced after his third try. "You're just new." Stephen looked down at the half-finished bracelet. "That's generous of you." "It's true," she said with a small grin. "Besides, Ryan will like it, even if it's crooked." A soft knock interrupted their moment. Dr. Langford, a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a commanding presence, stepped into the room. Her white coat was pristine, but her demeanor wasn't clinical. It was human. "Good news," she said, nodding to Stephen. "Ryan's stabilizing faster than we expected. The preliminary scan suggests that with surgery, there's a strong chance for full recovery." Stephen exhaled in relief. Chloe dropped her bracelet. "Really? Like, really, really?" Dr. Langford smiled. "Really, really, but it has to happen soon. The timing is delicate." "Do it," Stephen said without hesitation. "Whatever you need. He has full coverage under my name." The doctor's expression softened. "We'll prep the team. Surgery will be tomorrow morning." As she left, Chloe stood, suddenly uncertain. She walked to the bed and took Ryan's hand, her small fingers curling around his. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "You're gonna get better. You have to. I don't want to be alone again." Stephen turned away slightly, giving her privacy in her moment of vulnerability, though it twisted something fiercely inside him. "Chloe," he said gently, "you won't be alone." She looked up, her voice fragile. "Do you promise?" "I do," he said solemnly. "No matter what happens, I'll be here." That night, he didn't go home. He canceled meetings, ignored emails, and slept in a recliner in the corner of the room. Chloe curled up beside him under a blanket the hospital provided. At one point in the night, she stirred and whispered in her sleep, "Tell Mom we're okay. Tell her he's nice." Stephen lay awake long after, the pendant still resting in his pocket like a burning ember. He hadn't brought it up again, hadn't told her that he recognized it, because something inside him feared what it might mean. But his mind swirled. Margaret. The love he'd lost so mysteriously. The woman who vanished one summer night without explanation. Police had found no clues, no note, only silence. He'd buried his grief in work, convincing himself that some answers were simply beyond reach. And now, this child, that locket, that face. Morning came too fast. Chloe rose early, dressed in her best, an old sweater and clean jeans, and paced the hallway as nurses prepared Ryan. Stephen sat with her on a bench outside the OR, their shoulders almost touching. "You know," she began slowly, "Mom used to say people come into our lives when we need them most, but I didn't think she meant CEOs." Stephen laughed, softly but genuinely. "Neither did I." "Do you miss someone too?" she asked, her tone curious but kind. He hesitated. "Yes, someone very important." Chloe nodded, as if understanding more than she should. "Then maybe we found each other on purpose." Stephen didn't answer. He just looked at her, this brave, clever child who'd barged into his sterile world with a bag full of bracelets and eyes full of trust. A nurse emerged a moment later. "We're ready." Chloe took Stephen's hand instinctively, and for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel lost. He felt exactly where he was meant to be. The hours dragged. Stephen paced the hallway outside the operating room, his every step slow and measured, as if too much movement might shift fate itself. Chloe sat on the bench where they'd waited earlier, her legs pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around them tightly. She stared ahead, not crying, just quietly bracing. A nurse passed with a clipboard. A doctor entered through double doors. Every beep, every footstep made Stephen's breath hitch. He had survived hostile takeovers and negotiated billion-dollar contracts without blinking. But here, in this sterile hallway lined with anxious silence, he felt utterly powerless. "Would you like something to eat, Chloe?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "Not unless Ryan can eat too." Stephen sat beside her again. He's strong. He's got you, doesn't he?" She nodded slowly, her voice a whisper. "He always says I'm his reason." That hit Stephen squarely in the chest. A small paper bag sat beside her, partially open. Inside were a handful of handmade bracelets, some uneven, some neat, all created with the same earnest care. He picked one up gently, a lavender braid. "Did you make this one?" he asked. Chloe glanced over. "Yeah. That one I messed up the first time. Ryan said it looked like a jellyfish. I fixed it." Stephen smiled warmly. He was wrong. It's perfect. A few moments passed before a nurse finally emerged, her expression calm. "Ryan's out of surgery. Everything went smoothly. He's stable and resting now." Chloe jumped to her feet. "Can I see him?" The nurse smiled. "Just for a minute. He's still waking up." Stephen placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Go ahead. I'll wait here." She raced down the hall with the nurse, her pigtails bouncing, her tiny shoes tapping urgently. Stephen exhaled, closing his eyes briefly in gratitude. He leaned back, tension slowly draining from his shoulders, but not completely, because the deeper layers of the story still rested unsaid. That pendant, that face, that feeling that something once lost had returned not just through chance, but through destiny's quiet insistence. He pulled the locket from his coat pocket now, fingers brushing over the familiar grooves of the flower etched into its surface. It was the same one. The very same pendant he'd given Margaret Whitmore 10 years ago, the last time he ever saw her. She'd worn it during that stormy summer when everything fell apart. He opened it. The faded photograph inside still smiled back at him. Margaret, laughing in the sunshine, a beach behind her, wind in her hair. That woman had vanished without a word, a vanishing act that left his heart bruised and brittle. Police ruled it a disappearance. No body, no note. Rumors had surfaced, an accident, a runaway, perhaps even suicide. None were proven. Stephen had grieved quietly, almost shamefully, pouring himself into the rise of Parker Logistics. He'd buried love beneath ambition, like asphalt over earth. Now, here he was, holding that same pendant, having just promised to never leave a child who could very well be Margaret's. His thoughts were interrupted as Chloe returned. Her expression was tender, glowing even, despite her weariness. "He opened his eyes," she said, voice quivering with joy. "He squeezed my hand." Stephen smiled. "That's amazing." "He tried to talk, but the nurse said not to push. I told him you stayed, that you promised." Her eyes met his. "You still mean it, right?" "More than ever," Stephen replied. Suddenly, her face grew cautious. "Can I ask something weird?" He nodded. "Of course." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a wrinkled photograph. It was clearly old, worn at the corners. In it, a younger version of Stephen stood beside Margaret, both smiling, arms around each other. "My mom had this in her drawer," Chloe whispered. "She said the man in the photo was important, that he gave her the necklace." Stephen stared at the photo, stunned. He reached for it slowly. Where did she get this?" "She told me never to show anyone," Chloe said, almost apologetically. "But I wanted you to see it, because I think she knew you, really knew you." Stephen's voice cracked. "What was her name, Chloe? Your mom's name?" Chloe hesitated, then whispered, "Maggie. Maggie Whitmore." The world swayed. Stephen gripped the bench for balance. "Chloe, Margaret, Maggie she was someone I loved. A long time ago." Her voice turned small. "Then why didn't you come back?" "I didn't know," he answered brokenly. "She vanished. No one knew what happened. She said someone hurt her, said she had to run, but she always kept your photo and that necklace." Stephen felt like he'd been knocked breathless. His fingers trembled, and for once, he didn't try to hide it. "She had twins," he murmured. Chloe nodded. "Me and Ryan. She said we were her second chance." Stephen wiped his eyes. You're mine, aren't you?" Chloe didn't respond with words. She reached out and took his hand. And in the quiet hum of a hospital corridor, between machines and memories, something unspoken passed between them. Not confirmation, not yet, but the undeniable pull of belonging. Stephen sat in the hospital cafeteria, untouched tea cooling beside him, the pendant resting on the table between his fingers. The revelation weighed heavy. He was nearly certain now. Chloe and Ryan were Margaret's children, and maybe his own. He didn't need a test to feel what his heart already screamed. Chloe's quiet strength, Ryan's inquisitive stare, the unmistakable trace of Margaret's features, they weren't just her legacy. They were echoes of a life Stephen had once dared to dream of, and lost. "Mr. Parker?" Stephen looked up. Chloe stood in the doorway, clutching a paper cup of apple juice. Her face was calm, but her eyes searched his. "I brought you something," she said, walking over. "You didn't eat, so I figured juice is better than nothing." He managed a faint smile. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," she replied gently, then sat across from him, hands folded carefully. "Ryan asked about you." Stephen's breath caught. "He did?" Chloe nodded. "He whispered, 'Is he still here?' And I told him yes. I told him you didn't leave." Stephen swallowed hard, emotion tightening in his throat. "I won't leave you, Chloe. I promise." She studied him quietly, then pulled a tiny notebook from her backpack. It was worn and dog-eared, pages filled with drawings, quotes, and little lists. On one page, Stephen saw doodles of trains, dozens of them. "Ryan loves trains," she said. "He always said if we ever had a real home, he'd want a train room." Stephen felt his heart twist. He'll have one. A whole wall, even. Chloe smiled faintly. "You mean it?" "I do." There was a pause. Then she leaned forward, voice soft and steady. "Mr. Parker, was my mom really someone you loved?" Stephen nodded. "More than anyone. Before I lost her. Before I let fear and silence take everything away. She said you were kind, that you made her laugh, even when things were hard." He blinked rapidly. "She said that?" Chloe nodded. "She said love didn't always win, but real love never really left." Stephen's eyes brimmed. She was right. A nurse passed by and waved Chloe back to Ryan's room. She slipped the notebook toward Stephen. "You can read it," she said. "Just don't lose the train page." When she was gone, Stephen opened to the next few pages and found something unexpected. A child's poem scrawled in mismatched handwriting. "My family, I had a mom and a brother too. We laughed and cried. We made it through. We never had much, but we had us, and that was more than gold or trust. If one day comes, a hand held wide. We'll hold on tight and not just hide, because love is strong when hearts are true and family finds." Its way back to, Stephen traced the words with the trembling fingers. It wasn't just a poem. It was a message. A seed of hope planted by two children who had lost so much, yet somehow still believed in beginnings. Later that evening, Stephen stepped into Ryan's hospital room with the quiet reverence of a man entering sacred ground. Ryan was awake now, pale but alert. Chloe sat beside him, drawing on the windowsill. "Hi," Ryan said, voice raspy but steady. Stephen smiled gently. "Hi, buddy." Ryan blinked. "Chloe said you stayed. The whole time." "I did." A beat of silence passed before Ryan asked, "Why?" Stephen hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because someone very important once told me that family never walks away. I didn't understand it back then, but I do now." Ryan looked over at Chloe, then back at Stephen. "Do you know my mom?" Stephen nodded slowly. "I did, a long time ago. She told us about a man with kind eyes who gave her a necklace and made her feel safe." Stephen's throat tightened. "That was me." Ryan didn't say anything right away. Then, with a child's clarity, he asked, "Are you going to leave like all the others?" "No," Stephen said, kneeling beside his bed. "I will stay. I'll be here every day, and if you'll let me, I'd like to be a part of your family." Ryan studied him. Then, weakly, he held out his hand. Stephen took it. In that quiet hospital room, something shifted. The past no longer felt like a chain. It felt like a bridge. That night, back at his penthouse, Stephen stood by the window looking down at the sparkling city. His world had changed in a matter of days. What began with a small girl holding a handmade bracelet had turned into something vast and real. He opened his laptop and searched Margaret Whitmore. Scattered mentions, a missing person case filed, closed, unresolved, a photo. Her face stared back at him, soft, radiant, caught in time. Stephen whispered to the glass, "I found them, Margaret. I found them." Then he reached for his phone and dialed a number. "Hi, this is Stephen Parker. I'd like to start the process to become legal guardian for 2 children. Their names are Chloe and Ryan." 2 weeks had passed since Stephen's call to the guardianship office, but to him it felt like the start of a new lifetime. Each day he visited the hospital, never missing a morning. Chloe had taken to drawing in his lap as they waited for Ryan's tests. Ryan, now speaking more, looked to him with cautious trust. The suite of specialists Stephen had assembled was optimistic. "If all goes well," one cardiologist said, "Ryan may be eligible for surgery next month." Still, the path forward wasn't without resistance. That resistance arrived the moment a sharply dressed woman in a navy suit stepped into the hospital lobby and asked for Mr. Parker. She introduced herself as Diane Keller, a representative from Family and Child Services. "I'm here about the children," she said curtly. "Their legal status is complicated." Stephen stood firm, though her tone prickled. "I've applied for guardianship. Yes, I've seen your petition. But you're not listed on any birth certificate, there's no DNA record, and until recently, you weren't involved in their lives." "I didn't know they existed," he said, voice low but resolute. Ms. Keller offered a thin smile. "The court will consider all factors, including where the children feel safe, but the state has protocols. They may be placed in a temporary foster environment." "No," Stephen said, a bit too sharply. Then, catching himself, "They're already traumatized. They don't need more instability. We'll schedule interviews with the children and review your background. If you're serious about this, you'll need to prove more than financial stability. You'll need to prove emotional consistency." Stephen nodded slowly, tension coiling in his chest. "I intend to." That night, he found himself sitting at the edge of his penthouse bed, Chloe's little notebook beside him. The poem about family still lingered in his mind. But it was the pendant, the one Chloe had brought from her backpack, that now sat in a velvet box on his dresser. He had taken it to a jeweler to verify. It was the same model he had given Margaret over a decade ago, one of only 50 ever made. Hers had initials engraved on the back. He opened the box again, turned the pendant over. There it was. MDU plus SP. Always in Margaret's tiny, slanted handwriting. Stephen's breath caught. All doubt vanished. He wasn't just a man trying to make up for a stranger's absence. He was their blood. And it was time to tell them. The next morning, Ryan was strong enough to sit up in bed. Chloe was playing cards with him when Stephen stepped in, his face more serious than usual. "Can we talk?" he asked gently. Chloe set the cards down. Ryan looked up, alert. Stephen sat beside them, the pendant clutched tightly in his hand. "This belonged to someone I loved very much," he began. "Her name was Margaret. She wore this every day." Chloe's eyes widened. "That's my mom's necklace," he nodded. "I gave it to her, a long time ago." There was silence, the kind that hangs heavy with understanding. Chloe leaned forward slowly. "You knew her?" Stephen's voice trembled. "I more than knew her. We were engaged, before she disappeared, before I lost her." Ryan's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. You think you're our dad?" Stephen looked at both of them and said, "I know I am." Chloe blinked, stunned. Ryan just stared. Then Chloe whispered, "Mom said he was gone. Not bad. Just gone." "I didn't know about either of you," Stephen said, emotion rising in his voice. "But now I do, and I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." There were no big hugs, no tearful embraces, just a long silence. And then Chloe said, "If it's true, then I guess we found you too." Over the next few days, the children slowly adjusted to the truth. They asked questions about their mom, about Stephen's life, about why he never came sooner. Stephen answered everyone as honestly as he could. One afternoon, as they sat building a Lego train track in the hospital room, Chloe looked up and said, "Do you think Mom would be happy?" Stephen smiled sadly. "I think she'd be proud of both of you, and I hope, maybe proud of me too." Ryan placed the final piece on the track and gave Stephen a rare smile. "You're not bad with trains." Stephen laughed. "Not bad at all." Later that week, Stephen took them home for a weekend trial, just the three of them in his penthouse. He cooked grilled cheese, burned the first batch, helped with homework, Googled more answers than he should admit, and read them a bedtime story with such dramatic voices that Chloe snorted juice through her nose at dinner. For the first time in years, laughter echoed through his home. That Sunday night, he tucked them both into a guest room they now called ours. Chloe held on to her mom's pendant while Ryan whispered something Stephen couldn't hear. He leaned in. "Can we stay here forever?" Stephen kissed his forehead. "As long as you want. Forever, if I can help it." He turned out the light, heart full and aching all at once. Outside their room, in the hallway, stood Ms. Keller. She had come unannounced, quietly observing from the doorway. "You're not what I expected," she said softly. "Neither were they," Stephen replied, glancing back toward the door. Ms. Keller handed him a stack of forms. "Final interview is Tuesday. If it goes well, it's yours to lose." Stephen nodded, gripping the papers tightly. He wasn't going to lose this. He'd already lost too much. Stephen paced the hallway outside the courtroom, his hand trembling slightly as he adjusted the knot of his tie. The courthouse in downtown Chicago, typically imposing and sterile, felt even colder today. Chloe clutched his other hand tightly, her small fingers squeezing his with quiet strength. Ryan stood close by, unusually still for a boy who once couldn't go 5 minutes without fiddling. Inside, the judge would soon decide if Stephen Parker, a man who didn't know he had children until weeks ago, could be their legal guardian. "Do you think she'll ask if we love you?" Chloe asked timidly. Stephen knelt, leveling his gaze with hers. "She might." Chloe's gray-blue eyes softened. "Then we'll tell her the truth." He swallowed hard and nodded. "That's all we can do." They were called in moments later. The courtroom was smaller than Stephen expected, less dramatic than in the movies, but every creak of the wooden benches felt deafening. Judge Morales, a woman in her 60s with kind but discerning eyes, reviewed the papers silently before looking up. "Mr. Parker," she began, "this is a highly unusual request. You are not listed on either child's birth certificate. You've had no prior involvement in their lives. And yet, here you are, asking to become their full guardian." Stephen stood. "Yes, Your Honor, because they are my children. I didn't know until recently, but now I do, and I won't walk away." She studied him. "Do you have proof of paternity?" "I do. DNA results were submitted last week." He hesitated. "And there's also a letter from their mother." Judge Morales nodded to the clerk, who handed her a folded envelope with trembling reverence. The courtroom hushed as she opened it. It was handwritten, faded at the edges. "To whoever holds my children's fate in their hands," it began. Stephen listened, heart pounding, as the judge read Lucy's words aloud. "If anything happens to me, please know that I tried. I tried to raise them with love, to teach them kindness and resilience. I named them after stars, Chloe and Ryan, because they were the brightest part of my world. And if Stephen Parker ever finds them, if he comes back, tell him I never hated him. I just didn't know how to find him again. If he's standing in your courtroom now, it means he's trying. Please don't punish him for time we can't recover. Let him be their family. He was always mine." The courtroom remained silent long after the judge finished reading. Even the bailiff looked away, discreetly wiping his eyes. Judge Morales glanced at Chloe and Ryan. "Would either of you like to speak?" Chloe stepped forward bravely. "We want to stay with him. He's not perfect. He burns toast and forgets where the scissors go, but he listens. He laughs with us. And he smells like our mom used to say he did, like books and pine trees and old stories." Ryan added, "She used to tell us stories about a man who could build whole cities with his ideas. And I think he's that man." The judge looked at Stephen, then down at Lucy's letter, then back again. Her voice was firm but kind. "This court grants full guardianship to Stephen Parker." Stephen exhaled shakily, pulling the children into a tight embrace as emotion surged through him. Chloe buried her face in his shoulder while Ryan clung to his waist. It was done. They were his. That night, the three of them returned home, not to Stephen's penthouse, but to the modest, craftsman-style home he'd quietly purchased in the suburbs. The house was old, with creaky floorboards and ivy climbing the porch columns, but it had a yard. It had warmth. And it had something else. It was the very home Margaret had once shown him in a sketchbook, years ago, calling it her someday house. He had found it last week. The address was barely legible in one of her journals he'd recovered from Lucy's belongings. Now it was theirs. Chloe ran through the empty living room, her laughter echoing. "It needs curtains," she declared. "We'll pick some together," Stephen replied, smiling. Ryan wandered into the den, where Stephen had already set up a model train track. "You remembered," he whispered. "I remember everything that matters," Stephen said, stepping in beside him. That evening, as they ate pizza on the floor, surrounded by unpacked boxes and lit only by soft lamplight, Chloe drew a picture. 3 figures holding hands beneath a starry sky. She handed it to Stephen and pointed. "That's us." Stephen's throat tightened. The caption said, "Our real family, finally found." He held the drawing to his heart. Finally found, indeed. For the first time in years, Stephen woke not to the buzz of stock updates or emails, but to the sound of laughter echoing down the hallway. Chloe was giggling from the kitchen, her voice bright and cheerful, while Ryan's deeper chuckle followed close behind. It was a morning symphony Stephen never knew he needed until now. He lay there quietly for a moment, absorbing the warmth of this new life, one not measured in profits, but in presence. Downstairs, he found the twins at the kitchen island, struggling to open a jar of peanut butter. Chloe was perched on a stool, sleeves rolled up, brow furrowed in concentration. Stephen walked over, gently ruffled her hair, and took the jar. With one twist, it popped open. "Dad's strength," Ryan grinned, nudging his sister. The word "dad" hit Stephen like a soft collision, unexpected and tender. He didn't correct it. He didn't want to. The house had started to fill with life. The walls, once blank, now boasted artwork: Chloe's rainbows, Ryan's space rockets, and their shared masterpiece, a tree with handprints for leaves and names scribbled in the trunk: Chloe, Ryan, Mom, Stephen. The children had written Mom deliberately, not for Lucy, though they missed her, but for the memory of Margaret, their biological mother, whose face they had only seen in faded photographs and whose essence lived through the stories Stephen now told. That afternoon, Ryan pulled Stephen aside. "Can we go to Mom's grave today?" Stephen nodded slowly. Of course. He packed a small picnic basket, just sandwiches and juice, and they drove to the cemetery where Margaret had been laid to rest 10 years ago. It was a simple plot, marked with a small gray stone that read, Margaret L. Benson, beloved daughter, dreamer, and mother. Chloe placed a daisy bracelet she had made herself at the base of the stone. "We didn't get to meet her," she said softly, "but I think she'd like this." "I know she would," Stephen replied, voice trembling. Ryan looked up at him. "What was she like?" Stephen knelt beside them. "She was fearless. She once climbed a broken lighthouse just to see the sunrise from the top. She believed every problem had a solution if you stayed kind long enough, and she laughed with her whole soul." Chloe leaned against him. "I want to laugh like that." "You already do," he whispered. They sat for a long while, letting the spring breeze stir through the grass. Ryan lay back and watched the clouds, then pointed. "That one looks like a train." Stephen chuckled. She would have seen that, too. Back home, Stephen retrieved a cardboard box he had stored for years, too painful to open. Margaret's things. Letters she never sent. A baby onesie he didn't realize she had kept. A tiny hospital bracelet marked Baby A. He showed the box to the twins. "These belong to your mom. I wasn't ready before, but now, if you'd like." Ryan reached out first, his fingers brushing over a photo of Margaret holding an infant wrapped in blue. "That's me," he said with quiet certainty. They spent the evening exploring that box of memories. Chloe clung to a crumpled note Margaret had scribbled during pregnancy. "If it's twins, we'll need more Legos." Stephen laughed tearfully. She was always right. Later, Ryan crawled into the armchair next to Stephen. "Were you scared?" Stephen looked up. "When?" "When Mom died. When we came. When you said you wanted to be our family." He answered truthfully. "Terrified." Ryan nodded. "Me too." They didn't need to say more. The next morning, Stephen stood in the garage, watching a moving truck unload donations for the newly registered Margaret's House, a community shelter for children who had lost one or both parents. It was the dream she had once whispered to him late one night, and now, through her children, he would bring it to life. As he hammered the last nail into a wooden welcome sign, Chloe came running. "There's someone here to see you." He wiped sweat from his brow and turned. It was Margaret's sister, Emily, long estranged after the family split. She stood at the curb holding a bouquet of lilies. "I heard everything," she said softly. "I should have helped her. I should have been there." Stephen stepped closer. "She forgave all of us, long before we were ready to forgive ourselves." Emily's gaze fell on the twins chasing each other in the grass. "They look just like her. They carry her in everything they do." Chloe ran up and handed Emily a daisy. "Hi, want to help us paint rooms tomorrow?" Emily blinked back tears. "I'd love to." And in that instant, the circle began to close. The ribbon fluttered in the spring breeze, a soft crimson line against the freshly painted white archway of Margaret's house. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors, volunteers, even a few city officials. But for James Whitaker, it was only two faces that truly mattered. Chloe and Ryan stood beside him, dressed in matching light blue shirts and bright, hopeful eyes. Their fingers intertwined with his, they looked up as he handed Chloe the oversized scissors. "Want to do the honors?" he asked gently. Chloe nodded solemnly. "For Mom," The crowd clapped as the ribbon fell, but James didn't hear it. His eyes were fixed on the banner above the door, the one Chloe had helped paint in clumsy block letters. Welcome home. The days that followed felt almost dreamlike. Volunteers streamed in to furnish rooms with colorful rugs, bunk beds, and shelves lined with donated toys and books. James moved among them, not in a suit, but in jeans and a rolled-up flannel, his tie long forgotten. He scrubbed floors, unpacked boxes, and fixed squeaky windows. It was the most purpose he'd felt in decades. At night, the house echoed with laughter. Chloe hosted bracelet-making sessions on the porch, her hands a blur of beads and thread. Ryan organized toy train races in the common room, awarding paper medals he crafted himself. James watched quietly from the kitchen, a dish towel over his shoulder, letting the joy soak through every tired bone in his body. One evening, Ryan sat beside him as they folded laundry. "Dad," he said, still shy with the word, still testing how it felt on his tongue. James looked over. "Yeah, bud? Do you think Mom sees us?" James paused, his heart tender. "I think she sees everything, especially now." Ryan nodded. "Good. I want her to know we're okay." James placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're better than okay." In the backyard of Margaret's house, James built a wooden bench under the old oak tree. It became a quiet spot, shaded by rustling leaves and scattered with wildflowers. Chloe called it the thinking place. One sunny afternoon, she came out with a framed drawing. "We made this for you." It was a picture of their new family. Ryan with his trains, Chloe holding bracelets, and James in the center, arms wrapped around both of them. Behind them stood Margaret, translucent and smiling, the sky above filled with hearts and stars. Tears welled in James's eyes. "She's part of everything," Chloe whispered. "Yes," he said hoarsely, "she always will be." The legal process hadn't been easy. James faced sharp questions, skeptical attorneys, and long hours in court. But Lucy's letter, read aloud by the judge, spoke volumes. "If anything happens to me, please don't let the past define my boy's future. James has the heart to do what I no longer can. Let him." That letter, and the sincere testimony from Chloe and Ryan, carried the day. As the judge signed the guardianship papers, James felt something release inside him, a burden he hadn't realized he'd carried. For the first time in years, he was no longer defined by loss, but by love. On a quiet Sunday morning, James packed up his penthouse. He moved slowly, reverently, his old life slipping into boxes labeled "Donate" or "Storage." The grand marble, countertops, the high-rise view of the city skyline, the silence, none of it held meaning anymore. In his son's old room, untouched for a decade, James sat on the edge of the bed. He ran his fingers across the dust-covered train set. He whispered a quiet goodbye. Then he locked the door behind him. Their new home wasn't large or lavish. It sat on a tree-lined street in a modest Chicago suburb, a place with barking dogs, bicycles on lawns, and neighbors who waved without needing to know your net worth. Ryan and Chloe raced through the halls, arguing over who got the room with the window seat. James just smiled, lugging boxes from the car, grateful beyond words. That evening, they set up a projector in the backyard and watched old Disney movies on a bedsheet. Chloe fell asleep in his lap halfway through, her breath steady and warm. Ryan rested his head on James's shoulder and whispered, "Thanks for finding us." James swallowed the lump in his throat. "No," he said softly. "Thank you for saving me." Weeks later, a knock came at the door. It was Emily again, Margaret's sister, with a small suitcase and a hopeful look. "You said you had a guest room?" James nodded, stepping aside. "We still do." Ryan and Chloe erupted into cheers. Emily dropped her bags and joined their impromptu dance party in the living room, spinning Chloe until they both collapsed in giggles. Family had finally found its way home. The story ends with a slow zoom on a hand-drawn poster taped above the mantel. It reads, "Our family, Dad, Chloe, Ryan, Emily, and Mom, always in the sky." Below it, a quote from Margaret in looping handwriting, "Home isn't a place, it's a promise." James, seated nearby, looks at it with misty eyes. He pulls the children close, wrapping them in an embrace that speaks louder than words. He lost his son once, but through that loss he found something just as sacred. He found the family his son had dreamed of, and this time he would never let go.